The Demon Lover by Elizabeth Bowen. Toward the end of her day in London, Mrs. Drover went round to her shut-up house to look for several things she wanted to take away. Some belonged to herself, some to her family, who were now used to their country life. It was late August. It had been a steamy, showery day. At the moment, the trees down the pavement glittered in an escape of humid, yellow afternoon sun. Against the next batch of clouds, already piling ink-dark, broken chimneys and parapets stood out. In her once familiar street, as in any unused channel, an unfamiliar queerness had silted up. A cat wove itself in and out of railings, but no human eye watched Mrs. Drover's return. Shifting some parcels under her arm, she slowly forced round her latchkey in an unwilling lock, then gave the door, which had a push with her knee. Dead Air came out to meet her as she went in. The staircase window having been boarded up, no light came down into the hall, but one door she could just see stood ajar, so she went quickly into the room and unshuttered the big window in there. Now the prosaic woman, looking about her, was more perplexed than she knew by everything that she saw, by traces of her long former habit of life. The yellow smoke stain up the white marble mantelpiece, the ring left by a vase on the top of the escritoire, the bruise in the wallpaper where on the door being open widely, the china handle had always hit the wall. The piano, having gone away to be stored, had left what looked like claw marks in its part of the parquet. Though not much dust had seeped in, each object wore a film of another kind, and the only ventilation being the chimney, the whole drawing-room smelled of the cold hearth. Mrs. Drover put down her parcels in the escritoire and left the room to proceed upstairs. The things she wanted were in the bedroom chest. She had been anxious to see how the house was. The part-time caretaker she shared with some neighbors was away this week on holiday, known to be not yet back. At the best of times, he did not look in often, and she was never sure that she trusted him. There were some cracks in the structure left by the last bombing, on which she was anxious to keep an eye. Not that one could do anything. A shaft of refracted daylight now lay across the hall. She stopped dead and stared at the hall table. On this lay a letter addressed to her. She thought first, then the caretaker must be back. All the same, who, seeing the house shuttered, would have dropped a letter in the box? It was not a circular, it is not a bill, and the post office redirected to the address in the country everything for her that came through the post. The caretaker, even if he were back, did not know she was due in London today. Her call here had been planned to be a surprise, so his negligence in the manner of this letter, leaving it to wait in the dust, annoyed her. Annoyed, she picked up the letter, which bore no stamp. But it cannot be important, or they would know. She took the letter rapidly upstairs with her, without a stop to look at the writing until she let in light. The room looked over the garden and sharpened and lowered. The trees and rank lawns seemed already to smoke with dark. Her reluctance to look again at the letter came from the fact that she felt intruded upon, and by someone contemptuous of her ways. However, in the tenseness preceding the fall of rain, she read it. It was a few lines. Dear Kathleen, you will not have forgotten that today is our anniversary, and the day we said. The years have gone by at once slowly and fast. In view of the fact that nothing has changed, I shall rely upon you to keep your promise. I was sorry to see you leave London, but was satisfied that you would be back in time. You may expect me, therefore, at the hour arranged. Until then, K. Mrs. Drover looked for the date. It was today's. She dropped the letter onto the bed springs and then picked it up to see the writing again, her lips beneath the remains of the lipstick beginning to go white. She felt so much the change in her own face that she sent to the mirror, polished a clear patch in it, and looked at once urgently and stealthily in the mirror. She was confronted by a woman of 44, with eyes starting out under a hat brim that had been rather carelessly pulled down. She had not put on any more powder since she left the shop where she ate her solitary tea. The pearls her husband had given her on their marriage hung loose round her now rather than thinner throat, slipping in the V of the pink wool jumper her sister knitted last autumn as they sat round the fire. Mrs. Drover's most normal expression was one of controlled worry, but of assent. Since the birth of the third of her little boys, attended by a quite serious illness, she had an intermittent muscular flicker on the left of her mouth, but in spite of this, she could always sustain a manner that was at once energetic and calm. Turning from her own face as precipitously as she had gone to meet it, she went to the chest where her things were, unlocked it, threw up the lid, and knelt to search. But as rain began to come crashing down, she could not keep from looking over her shoulder at the stripped bed on which the letter lay. Behind the blanket of rain, the clock of the church that stood struck 6. With rapid, heightening apprehension, she counted each of the slow strokes. The hour arranged. "My God," she said, "what hour? How should I? After 25 years!" The young girl talking to the soldier in the garden had not ever completely seen his face. It was dark. They were saying goodbye under a tree. Now and then, for it felt, from not seeing him at this intense moment, as though she had never seen him at all, she verified his presence for these few minutes longer by putting out a hand, which he each time pressed, without very much kindness, and painfully, onto one of the breast buttons of his uniform. That cut of the button on the palm of her hand was, principally, what she was to carry away. This was so near the end of a leave from France that she could only wish him already gone. It was August 1916. Being not kissed, being drawn away from and looked at intimidated Kathleen till she imagined spectral glitters in the place of his eyes. Turning away and looking back up to the lawn, she saw, through branches of trees, the drawing-room window alight. She caught a breath for the moment when she could go running back there to the safe arms of her mother and sister and cry, "What shall I do? What shall I do? He's gone!" Hearing her catch her breath, her fiancé said, without feeling cold, "You're going away such a long way." "Not as far as you think." "I don't understand." "You don't have to," he said. "You will. You know what we said." "But that was... suppose you... suppose..." "I shall be with you," he said, "sooner or later. You won't forget that. You need to do nothing but wait." Only a little more than a minute later she was free to run up the silent lawn. Looking in through the window at her mother and sister, who did not for the moment perceive her, she already felt that unnatural promise drive down between her and the rest of all humankind. No other way of having given herself could have made her feel so apart, lost, and forsworn. She could not have plighted a more sinister troth. Kathleen behaved well when, some months later, her fiancé was reported missing, presumed killed. Her family not only supported her, but were able to praise her courage without stint, because they could not regret, as a husband for her, the man they knew almost nothing about. They hoped she would, in a year or two, console herself, and had it been only a question of consolation, things might have gone much straighter ahead. But her trouble, behind just a little grief, was a complete dislocation from everything. She did not reject other lovers, for these failed to appear. For years she failed to attract men, and with the approach of her 30s she became natural enough to share her family's anxiousness on the score. She began to put herself out, to wonder, and at 32 she was very greatly relieved to find herself being courted by William Drover. She married him, and the two of them settled down in the quiet, arboreal part of Kensington. In this house the years piled up, her children were born, and they all lived till they were driven out by the bombs of the next war. Her movements as Mrs. Drover were circumscribed, and she dismissed any idea that they were still watched. As things were, dead or living, the letter-writer sent her only a threat. Unable for some minutes to go on kneeling with her back exposed to the empty room, Mrs. Drover rose from the chest to sit on an upright chair whose back was firmly against the wall. The desuetude of her former bedroom, her married London home's whole air of being a cracked cup from which a memory, with its reassuring power, had either evaporated or leaked away, made a crisis. And at just this crisis the letter-writer had knowledgeably struck. The hollowness of the house this evening cancelled years on years of voices, habits, and steps. Through the shut windows she heard rain fall on the roofs around.